Well, I am very excited that you have decided to press pause in your busy day and join me for another episode of the Gracious Guest Show. And I am your humble host, Mike Creevy. And if you have been following the show for a while, you kind of know what the show's about, and there's always a little bit of ambiguity about it too, because sometimes, from episode to episode, it's not always very clear to see what this show's about. And this is basically where we try to pursue truth, goodness, and beauty. The fancy word for those back in the day, and in some circles today, is the transcendentals. Transcendent, that which picks us up out of the kind of humdrum, the mundane, and helps us to look beyond, helps us to wonder, to allow a sense of awe or appreciation into our lives. Because it's so easy to lose sight of that. It's so easy to kind of lose our mooring or become unanchored and just adrift. And, that's what we try to fight against here. That's what I'm trying to resist that. I'm bringing this show to you as a way to explore seemingly mundane things sometimes, like Star Wars. Although if you think Star Wars is mundane, you and I are at odds a little bit, I'm afraid. But maybe I can convince you otherwise in another episode. So there's some Star Wars episodes on here, Star Wars-related stuff that comes and goes from time to time. But I look at all sorts of stuff on the Gracious Guest Show, from food, recipes I found, to travel, which is what we're talking about today, to just, life in general, faith, movie reviews, book reviews, all sorts of fun stuff like that. So that's what this show is about, broadly. Today, I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit, as I promised a while back. This is episode 31, and in episode 12, which I originally recorded back in February of 2017, and I'm recording this now in the middle of August, so it's been a while. I had mentioned in episode 12 broadly the sort of the greatest trip I ever took, and that was kind of the topic for that show. And I promised a future installment or two, or however many, to kind of break that down a little more. So what I've decided to do now, after a while of reviewing this, is I'm going to split it into two parts now. So episode 31 you're listening to now is going to cover the first half of that trip in a little bit more detail. I can never go into as much detail as I like. And then the next episode 32, which I'll post in probably a week or two, if you're listening to the podcast, you can just wait for it and it'll pop up, will be on the second half of the trip. So for those of you who aren't aware, I've talked about this in episode 12. You can go back and listen to that to get a kind of a broad picture. But specifically what I'm talking about is a pilgrimage to the Holy Land that my brother and I were very fortunate to be able to go on in 2009. So in March of 2009, I believe I have my dates here in front of me. I have my little journal so I can remember some of the dates and stuff as we go. We basically, where are we at here? Yeah, so it was from March 4th and through March 14th, 14th of 2009, we went on this Holy Land pilgrimage. And it was, I found out about it through a couple different, channels and stuff, and some of the, kind of Catholic apologetics stuff that I follow for my own faith growth, and then also for work as well. I, over the years, became aware of the work of Stephen Ray and his wife Janet. They live in Michigan, and they do a lot of apologetics work. And they're both converts from a very kind of sometimes harshly even anti-Catholic background. Now, of course, not all Protestant Christians are like that or hostile or anything like that towards Catholics, but some groups are, very specifically anti-Catholic, or even believing that Catholics aren't Christians. So you can find a whole wide array, obviously, of different kinds of attitudes towards the Catholic Church. But Steve and Janet came from that very anti-Catholic background, and they, through a very interesting story, kind of came about and actually converted and became Catholic after a long struggle, really through discovering just how Catholic the early Christian church was. This happens a lot to people as they read the writings of the people who learned from the apostles directly. and then the next generation, it's alarming sometimes for people. A lot of times, even like Protestant ministers, who are very well educated in the Christian faith, they come to see some of these Catholic particulars that they thought were added on later to the faith, but they see it right there at the very beginning, and it's eye-opening for them, and causes them to ask a lot of questions. And it's a very difficult journey for people to make. So I had become aware of Steve's work, and one thing that Steve does a lot is he goes to the Holy Land. So he and Janet lead, I think, probably 10 or 12 pilgrimages every year to the Holy Land and different parts of it. So we looked around and we found a trip that they had coming up, and we had about a year to prepare for it, where they were going to go to Greece, Turkey, Israel, and Egypt, and kind of following the footsteps of St. Paul. Now, Egypt, it's a little different at the end because we don't have any evidence that St. Paul was ever in Egypt, but the Israelite experience in Egypt, the heritage of Egypt, and the involvement in the Bible, in the Old Testament especially, and the importance of Egypt factors in, of course, very greatly. So it was cool, to be able to go there. So my brother and I flew from JFK. We had actually 2 flights. We flew from JFK, then to London. We had a holdover, and then we flew from London into Athens, where we stayed at the Divani Caravel Hotel that night downtown. And we had a little bit of jet lag and everything, but we met Steve, we met the other people on the tour group, and there were about 115, 120 people total as part of this specific pilgrimage group. So we got to, talk a little bit that night, but didn't really meet a whole lot of people. It was kind of late. Went back and got some sleep, and then the next day we headed out by bus to go see Corinth. So we were staying in Athens. We were, drove down to Peloponnese, down to into Corinth. And by the way, so just to clarify, so this episode 31, this is going to be about Greece and Turkey, and then I'll talk about Israel and Egypt in episode 32. So getting back to it, so that first full day there, we went to Corinth, and it was so cool. I mean, St. Paul spent 18 months there. It was from Corinth that he wrote his really crowning letter, his letter to the Romans, which in your New Testament, if you have it in front of you, it's the first book after Acts of the Apostles, and it's clearly the most deep and theological of any of Paul's writings. So he wrote that letter from Corinth, and there were really cool pieces of evidence around Corinth and the ruins there. There was an inscription there to Erastus, a man named Erastus. I think he was like a treasurer of the city. He had been a benefactor of the Christian community in Corinth. And there's even, they found this carving, in the stone from back then, like a dedication, to Erastus for all your great work, something like that, in Corinth, kind of verifying that this, this guy that Paul, writes about or mentions in his letter. So there's more and more evidence to support the stuff in Scripture and in some of the historical stuff as well. So we saw all sorts of cool stuff. We saw the Greek and Roman ruins. You see a lot of that everywhere you go, which is so cool. And I'm a huge history buff, and I love ancient history. So I'm there with my brother, and we're having all of these connections with our Christian faith, but also just the really cool Greco-Roman kind of heritage too, which was so amazing to see. So we got to know people on the trip a lot more, and made a lot of friends really quickly. We were the youngest people on the trip, except for 2 young girls who were with their parents. But we were the youngest kind of people there individually. Everybody else was pretty much there on retirement, money and that kind of stuff. They were a little on the upper end of the age bracket. We toured all around Corinth pretty much that day. There were dogs everywhere. And that was another funny thing. It's just, I don't know if they were wild or what, but there's just we started naming them after Greek gods. And we kept doing that the next day too, because that night we went back, we stayed actually on our cruise ship back in Athens, but we hadn't set sail yet. So that the first night was like a hotel. The second night we sort of stayed on the cruise ship like a hotel, basically in harbor. So then the second full day, we got off the boat and then we toured around Athens itself. So that was so cool. We got to go to the Parthenon, the temple to Athena. We visited the Acropolis, where Paul preached. And if you go to your Bible, Acts chapter 17, his great sermon, that's where he gave it. And we read it there. Steve read the actual sermon, which was really cool, kind of hearing it there, where a lot of people turned against Paul or weren't interested, but some people heard him and came, and, it was the first sort of planting of those seeds of the faith there. And One of the men that heard him, and you read about this in Acts of the Apostles, was a man named Dionysius. So they were at the Areopagus, this public place, where you'd go and you could hear different people teaching philosophy or different ideas. And it's this big rocky kind of outcropping. If you've ever been to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Devil's Den, like the big rocky kind of area, it's kind of like that. So one of the guys who heard him was Dionysius, who's usually called in history Dionysius the Areopagite. Dionysius from the Areopagus. And he, tradition tells us, became the first bishop of Athens, really receiving the gospel and ultimately becoming this great leader. And the only Catholic church in Athens is, the church of Dionysius the Areopagite. So we got to go tour there, which was awesome. We also walked through the old agora, the old Greek marketplace in Athens. And it was funny because, Joe, my brother, we were just talking about, and this was almost 10 years ago now, but we've just been talking about how he just doesn't really love crowds, and kind of gets uncomfortable in crowds sometimes, or at least did back then. And then we laughed because we were trying to remember what the name for that was. And then we remembered, as we're walking through the agora, we remembered that it's agoraphobia. So we just kind of laughed, fear of the marketplace and all the people. So it really sank in. We're like, that's kind of ironic. So anyways, so we toured around Athens, got to see all the really cool sights and everything there. And then we got lunch. I remember it was a Friday, and it was Lent, and I remember we felt bad because everything they had there had meat in it, and we were trying to do the no meat on Friday, so we kind of fudged the no meat deal that day, and then we felt bad because the food was so good. We're having these delicious gyros and stuff, and just all this meat and pork and beef, and I was like, oh man. So it was really, really delicious, and we kind of got to walk around Athens on our own for a bit. I remember the place we were eating, there was a giant Bentley that came up and parked right outside, this beautiful, really nice car, and we're just looking at it wow, whose is that? So that was Athens, and then that night we got on the ship, and we actually set sail that night. So we ate dinner, and then we set sail, and I didn't do so well at first with it. I got some Dramamine, and I started kind of taking preventative Dramamine each night because the Mediterranean was pretty rocky. And our ship was great, the Crystal. It was Cristal, and it was a Greek ship with a lot of people that worked on the ship were from different countries in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, which led to I might do a whole separate show on the Crystal duo. It was his husband and wife team, Bulgarian cover tunes, or it was a Bulgarian singing duo. He played he had this Casio synthesizer, and she would sing, and it was so funny. We have so much video of it, and shame on us a little bit, but I mean. And we actually hung out with them a little bit too. We got some pictures of them, but it was so funny because they're singing all these cover tunes from the 70s and 80s, and all these famous songs, all the way up to Enrique Iglesias cover tunes, all these pop songs, but they didn't speak any English hardly at all. So they just memorized how to sing these songs. It was so funny. I think my favorite lyric was "Hero" by Enrique Iglesias. They sang, "You can take my breathe away," so we really had a lot of fun, and we would just go at night on the ship. We would go around to all the amazing sites during the day, and then at night, since a lot of people in our tour group were older, they'd go to bed pretty early. But my brother and I were in our early 20s, and we would go just to all the different bars and stuff, and we weren't being irresponsible or anything like that, but we just go and get some drinks and go to the different shows and the different we would always find out where the Crystal Duo was playing and listen to them. So that was a lot of fun. So anyways, that next day we officially, we woke up right around dawn. We were arriving at Kusadasi, the port city on the west coast of Turkey, not far from where Troy was. And so Turkey, obviously at the time, in biblical times, well, really in the times of Christ, it had been largely under the influence of the Greek culture for hundreds of years, and then the Romans had taken it over, of course. So it was very Greco-Roman, and to this day, Turkey, more than anywhere else in the world, has the largest number of Greco-Roman ruins, of both the Greek and the Roman heritage, which makes sense because there's this big crossroads through Anatolia or Asia Minor. So we mostly we would sail along at night along the Mediterranean, then port along the coast. So first the west coast, and then the southern kind of coast of Turkey over a couple of days. So our first day we went to Ephesus, which is on the west coast. It's traditionally the site where John the Apostle, who Jesus at the crucifixion said, referencing Mary, his mother, John and Mary are standing there. Jesus says, behold your mother, mother, behold your son. There's this gift in a sense. He's entrusting his mother to John, which is very strong, proof right there that Jesus had no other brothers or sisters. There's a lot of people that make this mistake when they read about Jesus's brothers and sisters in the New Testament. They think it means literal, like, sons of Mary, but the phrase that's translated brothers and sisters just means kinsmen. So, cousins, other relatives. There is no evidence at all in the New Testament to suggest that Mary ever had any other children. And the ancient tradition from the very beginning of the Christian faith is that she was always a virgin. She remained a virgin her whole life. So Jesus was her only child. And then this act we see too, Jesus was not one to be like cruel or insulting or anything like that. He would become righteously indignant and angry at sinners and at sin and stuff like that. For the sake of the gospel. But this act of entrusting his mother to his disciple John, if he had, under sort of Jewish heritage and everything, if he had any other brothers, the sort of custom would be for Mary to, of course, be entrusted to them. So it'd be a huge insult and a slap to the face and something very uncharacteristic of Jesus to do that if he had any other brothers, to take care of her. Or if there were any other close relatives, quite frankly, to take care of her. So the entrustment of Mary to John is very significant, and then because John is very much like this sort of pinnacle, kind of ultimate disciple, she really, in the earliest decades of the church, becomes like the mother of the community, and we see that in Scripture, and we see that certainly in the tradition. So John took Mary with him to Ephesus. There's some differences in traditions on where she died. There's some people that believe that she came back with him for the council in Jerusalem, which you read about in Acts of the Apostles, and that while she was there, she sort of departed earth for heaven. There are other traditions that she passed on from Ephesus. So it's not really clear, but her house is there. They found the foundations of where Mary lived up on this mountain, and it's so beautiful up there. Very wooded and just this really serene sort of location. So we got to tour there, and it was really just awesome to be able to be there in that very prayerful environment. And then right at the foot of the mountain is Ephesus and the ruins of Ephesus, which was, I think they had the third largest library in the empire at that time, just behind Alexandria and another one I can't remember off the top of my head. So there were really cool ruins there, the Gate of Hercules, where if, they're pretty far apart, but if like there's two stone pillar things on either side, and if you could walk between them and touch on either side of the road with both your hands, that was supposedly some real sign of like virility and strength, because they're so far apart. You have to be really big to reach them. I couldn't reach them. They had old Roman latrines that would still be functioning. And our tour guide told us, our tour guide Ahmet, who's from Turkey, really funny, he told us there's a fountain in the middle of the one. There's like this bathroom you walk in, and it's like this square room, and it's like a stone shelf all the way around that you'd sit, and there's like, you can still see the holes that are there for like where you would sit to go to the bathroom, and there's a fountain in the middle. And he was so funny because he didn't know quite how to say it, and he's like, and you would hear the sound of the water running, and that can sometimes help, and we're like, yep, got it. So that was funny. So just the engineering was so cool, and these ancient, ruins and the amphitheater there, which the acoustics are incredible because it used to be on the sea. It's now silted in because of the river and everything since in the last 2,000 years, but it used to be right on the harbor, and the sound would kind of come up into the amphitheater, which is basically dug into the side of the bottom of the mountain. So that was so cool to go to Ephesus. And then so that night we sailed again. The next day we ported in Mersin, which is kind of south-central Turkey, and went inland again by bus to Perga and Aspendus. And Perga was where, like Paul, it's another place that Paul preached. That's where he had his famous sort of argument, for whatever reason it was, with Mark, who left. And Mark went back to Jerusalem, went home. He didn't want to be there anymore. And Paul wasn't too happy about that. But they also had more ruins and stuff there. It was really cool. And they had... I think it was in Perga, there was a really cool, like, preserved old ancient marketplace where there was a fountain in the middle where the water came down from the mountains, and you could, if it was hot, like, you could put your feet in the water and it would be nice and cool. And there was still, like, you could see stone chunks from, like, what used to be signs, like, outside businesses. Like, there's one that clearly had, like a picture of a fish on it. Like, there's, like, this is where you get fish, and there's, like, here's the butcher shop. And it was so neat just to see, like, this is, where people lived and worked, and they came here and, bought their food, and, so that was really neat. The gymnasium was still there, some of the baths and stuff. And then we went from there to Aspendus, which is a Roman theater. It's the most thoroughly preserved Roman theater in all of Turkey, all of Asia Minor, and the acoustics were the most incredible there. In fact, I think they still had, up till a few years ago, they would hold concerts there. I think Sting played there, some like in the early 2000s, but I think they've curbed that a little more because there's been more concern about preserving the site. And I also got duped. We got off the bus, and this total like schmoozer guy, like this Turkish guy with like this camel, somehow tricked me into, like, I was petting it, and then he like gets me up on top of the camel and then like charges me to ride the thing. And I found out two things. Number one, I really got to make sure I'm not tricked into something like that again. And number two, I'm apparently really allergic to camels. So I had this really nasty, well, I'm either allergic to camels or it was just a really dirty camel. I don't know. But I did get an awesome picture from it, which I use from time to time. I've used it sometimes on my LinkedIn profile. It's just this random picture of me riding this heavily souped up, decorated camel, which was pretty funny. But anyways, so that was Aspendus, the Roman theater. We also toured and visited this silk facility, like a modern day, like where they make Turkish silk and stuff, and like a lot of Turkish rugs. So we got a special visit to one of these places, and that was really cool. So a lot of people, bought Turkish carpets and were sending them home and stuff, and they did the whole show where they flip them around like pizzas, kind of in the air. Or like a basketball player spinning a basketball on his finger. The guy's like just spinning a carpet, like holding it on his finger. So it was just a really cool show, and we just really got a neat sort of exposure to a lot of just Turkish, culture and the background of silk and making these rugs and stuff. So that was really neat. So then we sailed again that night, and then we ported lastly at Antalya on the sort of eastern end of the Mediterranean, like the northeastern little nook there. And we drove inland to my favorite two places we went, which were Tarsus, which was Paul's birthplace and a thriving Roman city at the time, which meant that then Paul, because he was raised there, even though he was Jewish, he was a Roman citizen. And that's ultimately what figures in his appeal to go to Rome to be tried by Caesar himself near the end of his life. And then we also visited Antioch. So I'll get to that in a sec. But so when we went to Tarsus, it was a pretty modern city. They had a lot of tower-like apartment complexes. And they had chimneys, like sort of exterior chimneys to kind of help prevent, fires. Because it gets hot, and what a lot of Turkish people do, which was also, I saw this a lot in Iraq, and I know it happens in a lot of other places in the Middle East, is it gets hot and you sleep outside sometimes during the summer. Like if it's a kind of a cool night and your house is still hot, you sleep on the balcony or up on the roof even sometimes. So you saw a lot of kind of that configuration going on, or people getting ready for that, even though it was only March. It was already getting pretty warm. So we kind of toured around there a little bit and saw a street performer who's he was doing it all in English, but a street performer who does like daily performances as St. Paul, which was really cool. He was very compelling, very, very animated, and there was an old well there that was there from Paul's time. So just a lot of really cool sights to visit in his hometown, just to see where St. Paul was really from. It was really, really cool. And then lastly, we drove from there a while. I want to say it was a good hour and a half maybe. I think, if my memory fails me a little, but on our way to Antioch. And the terrain, it was almost like Mordor. It was like these really craggy kind of rocks and very interesting looking terrain. The Cilician Plain you read about sometimes. And then you go over the Cilician Plain, and as you approach Antioch, I forget the new name for the city, but the ancient name is Antioch. And so it's mostly a modern city now on the Orontes River. And it's basically right at the foot of this mountain, and then just a little bit before you get to the shore for the Mediterranean. And this was where Christians were first called Christians. So they start off really as a sort of a movement within Judaism where they, and to this day, really, see ourselves as, in a sense, like receivers of the fulfillment of the covenant God was doing with the ancient Israelites. So they didn't really see themselves as necessarily like a new movement, but as rather the fulfillment of all the promises God had made to Israel, ultimately culminating in the mission and person of Jesus Christ and his resurrection and the founding of the church. But they're first called Christians for the Greek word Christos, followers of the Christos. which is the Greek version of the Hebrew word Messiah or Mashiach. So, the anointed one, the promised Savior of Israel. When you translate that in Greek, it comes out Christos. That's where we get Christ. So that's where they were first called Christians, or followers of the Christ, because of the Greek influence in Antioch. And this was significant because this was a huge, huge Christian center for thousands or hundreds and hundreds of years. In the earliest days, Peter was there for a brief time. Before then, he appointed St. Ignatius of Antioch to be one of his, sort of successor as bishop there. We have the writings of St. Ignatius of Antioch, who learned directly from the apostles. He's one of these guys who writes very Catholic, talks about the Eucharist, talks about bishops, talks about how the Eucharist is not just a symbol, but it's the actual flesh and blood of Jesus Christ. And he's writing this, within the lifetime, basically, or just after the end of John's lifetime. So he knew the apostles, he learned directly from them, preserved what they passed on to him and passed it down. And there's a cave church there. It's called the Cave Church of St. Peter. It was a hiding place where the early Christians during that time would go and worship, and there was even like a tunnel they showed us, like an escape tunnel, that if like authorities found you could escape out the back and it would come out another place in the mountain. There was a trail and stuff. And then the best blessing of all was because of a lot of the restrictions in Turkey, sadly, against Christians and other religions too. It's a very secular state after Ataturk and the reforms of the 1920s and stuff, and after the fall of the Ottoman Empire following World War I. Turkey's a very secular state. There's a lot of like anti-Christian sentiment there. So no clerics are allowed. Like if you're a religious leader, you can't wear a distinctive clerical garb. And there's a lot of crackdown on the church. So we met the only priest in the whole region. And he's this older father and just incredible guy. And he actually, someone worked some like drug deal. I don't know if there was bribing or what, but they allowed us to have mass in the Cave Church of St. Peter, like the very cave where the earliest Christians celebrated the Eucharist, during the lifetime of the apostles. And it was just profoundly incredible experience, and we kind of had to hurry through it just in case like anybody else came in or was touring. So we did that, and that was just amazing to break bread, where they broke bread. Of course, in the scripture, the breaking of the bread and the prayers. That's a phrase you see a couple times in the New Testament, and it's a euphemism really. It's a way they referred to the Mass. And we have a lot of records of that, and there's a lot of writings on that. If you're curious about any of this and you want to follow up with me on some of it, shoot me an email or go to the website, thegraciousguest.org. I'm going to cut it here. We left that night and we headed for Israel, and that's where I'll pick up in the next episode. But I want to kind of press pause for now. But that's a little bit more about Greece and Turkey and how it wasn't just a trip, but it was really a pilgrimage, because they're going to these sites that are so charged with sort of energy and tradition and the heritage of what we hold most dear of all, our faith, and being able to be in these places where these people that we read about and that we read what they wrote and how they followed Christ, how to connect with kind of where they were in a very, very powerful way. And also then when I read the Bible, when I read these stories of these places that these people went, now in my mind, I'm like, oh, I know exactly what that looks like. Like, oh yeah, I've been to Antioch. I know exactly what. So that's really, really been probably the most powerful thing that has stayed with me, these years, and hopefully will for the rest of my life. So I can't wait to pick up with Israel, which is the best, and Egypt, which was the oldest and coolest maybe for that stuff, as far as the ruins, in the next episode, which I will do. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and bring the show to a close. Thank you for tuning in to The Gracious Guest Show. Gracious Guest Podcast is always available on Podbean, on Pocket Casts, on iTunes. If you like the show, please go over to iTunes and give me a nice review over there if you would. It helps get the word out about the show, helps people have the opportunity to tune in and maybe learn something, maybe be able to share something. And as I said, if you want to shoot me a message through the form on the website, it's thegracioussguest.org. Check out the blog posts, presentation information, all that kind of stuff. Keep in touch, and until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.